I'm Linda Hart, 63 years old, and this is how my world collapsed in one single moment. The day I came home from the hospital, still weak from emergency surgery, I stepped out of a taxi and froze. A bold red and white sign stood planted in my front yard. Sold. My house. Gone. Every box of my life-old photographs, kitchenware, even the quilt I stitched with my late husband was stacked on the porch like unwanted trash. On top of it all sat an envelope. Inside, a single sheet with my son's handwriting. Handle it. That was all. Imagine the sting of realizing the child you raised for decades decided to erase your home while you were lying in a hospital bed. That was my reality. And in that moment, I knew I had crossed into a chapter of life I never expected. If you're listening right now, don't just hear this as my story. Think about your own family ties, your own sense of home. And before we go further, let me ask you, where are you watching from? Subscribe and share below. Because this journey, it might echo closer to your life than you think. My name is Linda Hart. For more than 40 years, I taught elementary school, guiding little hands across pages of books and listening to their laughter echo through classrooms. When my husband passed away 5 years ago, I leaned on my only son, Evan. He was my anchor, or at least I thought he was. I even helped him and his wife Brooke buy their home, just 20 minutes from mine. I believed family meant we carried each other. But one late evening, my body betrayed me. A stabbing heat tore through my abdomen, sharp and merciless, as if a rod of fire twisted inside me. My fingers shook as I dialed 911. The last sound I remember was the wail of sirens and the cold fear that I might not make it through the night. When I opened my eyes 3 days later, the doctor told me infection had spread quickly. Another hour and I might not have survived. I reached for my phone expecting messages, missed calls, some sign of concern. Nothing, not one single call from Evan. Over the next 4 days, I tried again and again, 17 times in total. Each call ended in voicemail. Each silence cut deeper than the incision across my stomach. I told myself they were busy, but the truth gnawed at me. I was alone in a way I had never been before. And when discharge day came, I lied to my doctor, promising that Evan would take care of me at home. Deep down, I knew he wouldn't. The morning I was released, the nurse placed a stack of papers in my hands. I signed them with fingers still weak from medication. The doctor reminded me that I wasn't supposed to lift anything heavy, that I would need help changing my dressings, that recovery would take at least a week of careful rest. I nodded, forcing a small smile, and told her my son would be there for me. Inside, I knew it was a lie. I hailed a taxi because there was no one waiting. The ride home was quiet, the streets rolling past like a dream I couldn't quite catch. My neighborhood looked the same, but as the cab turned down Maple Avenue, something in me tightened. The air felt heavier, the houses somehow unfamiliar, as though I was approaching a place I no longer belonged. I stared out the window, clutching my side to ease the ache from the fresh scar across my abdomen. Each bump in the road sent a jolt through me, but it wasn't only physical pain. It was the weight of uncertainty, the gnawing sense that what waited for me at home wasn't comfort, but something else entirely. I didn't know it yet, but my life was about to unravel in ways I couldn't have imagined. When the taxi turned the final corner, my breath caught. My front yard, where I had planted tulips every spring, where I had waved to neighbors for 30 years, was no longer mine. A bold red sign stabbed the grass with one word across it: sold. I paid the driver with shaking hands, but I could hardly move. My house, the place where I raised Evan, the place my husband Robert and I built together, had been stripped away. And worse, scattered across the porch were boxes my life packed into cardboard, as though I were nothing more than clutter to be cleared. I stumbled up the steps, every ache from surgery magnified by disbelief. On top of one box, a white envelope waited, my name scrawled in Evan's handwriting. Inside, a note no longer than a few lines. They had sold the house. Brooke had packed what she thought I might need. The rest had been donated. They had even chosen an assisted living facility for me at $3,800 a month and expected me to handle the rest on my own. At the bottom, 2 words burned into me. Handle it. The pain in my stomach was sharp, but it was nothing compared to the agony clawing through my chest. My son, my only child, had taken away my home while I lay unconscious in a hospital bed. I walked inside, though it no longer felt like inside. The dining table Robert had lovingly refinished for our 20th anniversary gone. My bedroom stripped bare, leaving only a mattress on the floor. The kitchen, once warm with Sunday dinners, was empty except for a coffee mug Brooke must have left behind. I sank against the wall and wept, not just for the home I had lost, but for the son I no longer recognized. Yet, in that flood of grief, something hardened. A quiet voice inside whispered that I was still Linda Hart, and I was not going down without a fight. Section 506300830 First Rescue and Legal Path, 260 words. That night, I didn't stay in the hollow shell of my house. I picked up the phone and called my oldest friend, Nora Sanders. She didn't hesitate. Within an hour, her Volvo pulled into my driveway, headlights cutting through the dark. She helped me gather what little I could carry, eased me into the passenger seat, and drove me away from the wreckage of my old life. At Nora's home, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: safety. She fussed over me like we were back in college, changing my bandages, making sure I took my medication on time, sitting quietly beside me when the tears came at 3 a.m. She reminded me that even when family turns away, love can still be found in unexpected places. The next day, I met with Calvin Reed, the financial advisor I had trusted for years. As I laid out what had happened, my heart pounded with dread. But Calvin opened a folder and showed me numbers that stopped me cold. The investments Robert and I had built with his insurance money had grown steadily. I wasn't wealthy by city standards, but I was far from helpless. I had enough to choose my future. Calvin urged me to take immediate steps. He referred me to Dana Morales, an elder law attorney. Dana explained the reality: because Evan's name was on the deed, the sale might stand. But the circumstances, my hospitalization, my lack of consent, could give us grounds for a challenge. More importantly, she urged me to secure my finances now, before another betrayal could take root. For the first time since that awful note, I felt a spark of hope. I made a decision that surprised even me. I left Connecticut behind and moved to Naples, Florida. Nora had a cousin with a small guest house tucked behind her home, shaded by palms and overlooking a quiet garden. The rent was affordable, the air was warm, and for the first time in months, I felt I could exhale. My days slowly took shape. Mornings began with coffee on the patio as sunlight spilled across the garden wall. Sometimes I would watch tiny lizards scurry across the stones, and their simple persistence reminded me that life goes on, no matter the storms. 3 times a week, I joined Nora for water aerobics at the community pool. The movements were gentle, but they gave me back a sense of strength I thought I had lost. Afternoons I wandered. I explored small museums, sat in the public library, strolled the beach as the sun dipped into the Gulf. Sometimes I went alone, savoring the anonymity of being just another silver-haired woman in a crowd of retirees. Other times, Nora joined me, her laughter lifting the heaviness that still clung to me. All the while, my phone filled with calls from Evan. 17 in the first week. The exact number I had once dialed from my hospital bed. This time, I didn't answer. Each silence was a boundary, a quiet declaration that I would no longer beg for love that should have been freely given. I was healing not just my body, but my spirit. A few months into my new life, an email arrived that made me pause. A producer named Paige Turner from a national morning show had heard about my story through my attorney. She asked if I would consider speaking on their series about reinvention after 60. My first instinct was to decline. I had never been the type to seek attention, and the thought of telling the world about my family wounds felt too raw. But Paige framed it differently. She said my story wasn't just about loss. It was about reclaiming autonomy, about choosing dignity when others tried to take it away. And that struck a chord. I agreed. With one firm boundary, my financial details would remain private. That part of my life, I thought, belonged only to me. When I arrived at the studio in New York, the bright lights and busy staff made me feel small, but the kindness of the crew helped. They polished my hair and makeup, but they didn't change me. They told me I already looked like the kind of woman who had found her footing again. The interview began gently. I spoke about the surgery, the betrayal, the move to Florida, and how I had learned to protect my finances and rebuild my independence. It felt empowering to say aloud that it's never too late to take back control. And then it happened. The host, in her closing remarks, mentioned a number I had never intended to share: my annual investment income. $68,000. My heart sank. That figure was not meant for public ears, and I knew instantly what it meant. By the time I returned to my hotel room, my phone was vibrating endlessly. Calls, texts, one after another. Evan had seen the broadcast. The son, who had been silent for almost a year, suddenly could not stop reaching out. 99 calls in less than 3 days. I stared at the screen, and for the first time, I didn't feel powerless. I felt the shift. The balance had changed. The days after the broadcast felt surreal. My phone never stopped buzzing. 99 missed calls, dozens of frantic messages, all from Evan and Brooke. The same voices that once ignored me now begged for my attention. But I held my silence. Each unanswered call reminded me of the 17 times I had once pleaded from my hospital bed, only to be met with emptiness. While I wrestled with the noise, my attorney, Dana Morales, reached out with unexpected news. The title company that had handled the sale of my house had flagged an irregularity. The notary listed on the paperwork insisted she had never met me, never witnessed me sign a single page. My signature, the one that supposedly gave permission to sell the home, was a forgery. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It was one thing to be cast aside, but to realize my own son had allowed false papers to push me out of my home, that wound cut deeper than anything before. Dana laid it out clearly. This wasn't just betrayal. It was fraud. It could mean criminal charges if I chose that path. But what I felt in that moment wasn't a thirst for punishment. It was clarity. I didn't need to see Evan in a courtroom. I needed protection. I needed security. I needed the leverage to ensure this never happened again. So I made a choice. Instead of picking up the phone, I sent one simple message. I told Evan that if he wanted to talk, he would meet me face to face. Tomorrow, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, at Seaside Cafe, overlooking the Gulf. No Brooke. No excuses. Just him. For the first time in a long time, I felt the balance tip back into my hands. I arrived at Seaside Cafe early, choosing a table in the corner with a clear view of the ocean. The smell of salt water mixed with fresh coffee, and I tried to steady my breathing. My hands trembled slightly as I wrapped them around a glass of iced tea. For the first time in over a year, I was about to face my son not through a screen, not through unanswered calls, but in person. When Evan walked in, he looked older, thinner, worn down. The sparkle he once carried had been replaced with a heaviness I barely recognized. As he sat across from me, the silence stretched between us like a canyon. My heart ached, but I reminded myself why I was here. I wasn't here to rescue him. I wasn't here to be manipulated. I was here to set the terms of my own life. I told him the truth as I saw it. I reminded him how I had once begged from a hospital bed. 17 unanswered calls that went into the void. I told him about standing in front of my house with a sold sign planted in the lawn, my belongings stuffed into boxes with nothing more than a note to handle it. And I told him I knew about the forgery. The shame that crossed his face told me more than words ever could. For a moment, I saw the boy he used to be, the one who used to run into my arms after school, the one who cried on my shoulder when life felt too heavy. That memory softened me, but only a little. I set the boundary clearly in my heart. If he wanted a relationship, it would be on new terms: respect, honesty, and distance when necessary. No more taking, no more control. For once, I held the power, and I wasn't going to give it away again. As I left that cafe, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady, and for the first time in years, I felt like myself again. In the weeks that followed, the dust began to settle. With my attorney's guidance, I reached a legal agreement with Evan. He signed over my share of the house proceeds, along with compensation for the turmoil his actions had caused. I didn't demand criminal charges. I didn't want my son behind bars. What I wanted was peace of mind. The assurance that I would never again be left without control of my own life. I used part of that money to secure a small condo of my own in Naples. It wasn't large, but it was mine. Every square inch chosen by me. Decorating it, arranging each room to my liking, felt like reclaiming pieces of myself that had been packed away in those boxes. For the first time since Robert died, I felt at home, not because of the walls or the furniture, but because I was finally standing on my own terms. As for Evan, our steps toward reconciliation were slow and cautious. We shared a few meals, a few conversations that circled safe topics. I didn't rush forgiveness, and I didn't offer it freely. Trust, once shattered, takes time to mend if it ever fully mends at all. Still, I allowed space for the possibility that my son could learn, could grow, could become someone I could rely on again. I also chose to keep speaking publicly. That morning show appearance turned into more invitations, and I realized that my story had touched countless women who had been sidelined, dismissed, or stripped of their independence. Each time I spoke, I carried with me the reminder that even in the darkest seasons, it's possible to rebuild. Life after betrayal isn't about pretending the pain never happened. It's about choosing not to live in that pain forever. And as I stood on my balcony overlooking the Gulf one evening, the sun sinking low on the horizon, I finally understood something simple yet profound. Sometimes losing everything you thought you needed is what frees you to discover who you really are. As the months passed, I realized I was no longer just surviving, I was truly living again. The betrayal that once defined me had become part of my story, but it was not the ending. It was the turning point. I found comfort in the little things. The smell of coffee on quiet mornings. The laughter of new friends who welcomed me into their circle. The feel of the ocean breeze brushing my face as I walked along the shoreline. These were reminders that joy doesn't disappear forever. It waits patiently for us to make room for it again. Evan and I spoke from time to time. Sometimes it felt hopeful, sometimes strained. I didn't know if our relationship would ever look the same as before. And maybe that was the point. Relationships change, people change. The real question was whether I could hold firm to my boundaries while leaving space for compassion. For now, that was enough. What I've learned is this: dignity is not something we can allow others to decide for us. Respect must be mutual. Love, even within families, should never come at the cost of our independence or self-worth. And when those things are threatened, we have the right, no, the responsibility to protect ourselves. Looking back, I can honestly say losing my home, my security, even my son's trust, was devastating. But in losing those things, I found something more important: my voice, my strength, and a life built on my own terms. If you've listened this far, maybe you've walked through your own seasons of betrayal, or maybe you know someone who has. I hope my story reminds you that even when everything feels lost, you still hold the power to begin again. So let me ask you, what would you have done in my place? Would you forgive, or would you walk away? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below. And if my story touched you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more, and share it with someone who might need to hear it today. Because sometimes, telling our stories is how we help each other heal.